Hello there, welcome back. So, for this video, I'm going to be getting back to a topic that somebody had asked me if I would cover, and that is how to make calculation easier. So, I have 5 suggestions that I'm going to make that you can use, and hopefully it'll make your life a little bit easier. So, first of all, one thing to know about calculation is that calculation is not as important as you probably think it is. There's a lot of strong players and master level players that can't actually see that far ahead, and they really are just good at chess because they're better at knowing what's important and what the position needs. And yes, they can calculate a little bit to make sure that their moves aren't falling into tactical traps and things like that. But really, they're just playing the position and seeing what it needs, and that's what they're better at, and that's why they're a good player. So, with that out of the way, now let's get into how we can actually make it easier. So, the first thing that I'll suggest is tactics. Find like a tactics trainer, maybe like the one on chess.com, and do the training. And if you do a few puzzles every day and you really analyze them, it'll start to make you better. It's kind of like if you wanted to exercise a muscle, like your arms or your legs, you'd go to a gym and you'd start exercising them to make them stronger. If you want to make your ability to analyze positions and to see farther in, then doing something like tactics every day would really help you to be able to see farther. And so there's great ones like on chess.com, Lichess, or you could always get like a tactics book and solve tactics to strengthen your ability. So, number 1, tactics. Now, let's move on to number 2. So, number 2 is forcing moves. If you use forcing moves like a threat, capture, check, that'll make your job easier to calculate lines because if, say, you put your opponent's king into check, then that's really going to limit their options. Like, let's look at this opening, for example. Just as an example, everybody probably knows the theory behind this, so there's no real need to calculate things out. But in this position, Bogo Indian defense, white only has 4 legal moves, and only 3 of which can actually be considered as good. And so, if you do something like give checks, then that's going to cut down the amount of calculating you have to do because your opponent will have less options, and so it'll be easier for you to figure out what's going on. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about candidate moves. So this position I'm going to put on the board here is from a game that I played in a tournament. And so candidate moves are when you only take the few most likely or best moves in the position and look at them. And if you cut it down to just the few most likely moves to be played, then that can make your job a little bit easier because you won't be calculating every single move, which is completely unnecessary. We're not computers. But in a position like this, you know that there's threats of capturing on e4. There's threats of sacrifices. And if you know that there's threats of sacrifices on e4, you can quickly narrow it down saying, okay, something needs to be done about that. So how can we defend e4? And so there's 3 moves that quickly come to your mind. You say queen e2 would defend, knight d2, or we could always just castle the king. And if we castle, then the sacrifices won't really work because the king won't be on the e file. And so this rook staring down won't create some problems. And so that's the third one, candidate moves. Now, the fourth one can go right along with candidate moves, and that is focusing on one line at a time. I see a lot of players make the mistake of when they go to calculate out a line, they'll say, oh, something like, if queen d2, there's bishop takes on e4 as a sacrifice, and I say, but what if instead of doing that, I play knight d2, and they just kind of jump around, and they say, oh, or I get castle, and they just will keep going like 2 or 3 moves deep without focusing on the line until they see something through to the end. And so you really have to look through until you see something that either loses a lot of material or wins a lot of material. And if you see that you're winning like the queen, then at that point you can probably stop analyzing. But if you look at queen e2, for example, we know that white couldn't play this in this position because after we follow this line through to the end, we know that there's this discovery that looks very dangerous on the queen, and there's also the threat to the knight, and so there's a lot of bad things that are going to happen eventually. White would lose the rook. And if you see something like losing the rook, at that point you could say, okay, that cancels out queen d2. And then you say, oh, well, knight d2, that adequately defends, but the knight will be slightly, maybe not as active as it was on f3, and so let's take a look at the last option of castling, and you say, okay, king's perfectly safe. Over here, there's no threats. All my pieces seem happy, so let's play that. And so after you thoroughly analyze it, then play your moves. And that can help you with calculation and help you get faster. Just focus on one line till the end, or you see a problem with it until you see it doesn't work, or you see that it does work, because that's something I very commonly see happening. Okay. Last, we're going to talk about something called intuition. Intuition is like your chess instinct. And that can really be good in positions like this one here. Because in this position, calculating out lines really won't be of very much benefit because there's not a whole lot of tactics going on. And so you have to really think about your positional ideas and then think about that, because the calculating just won't work. And in a position like this, you just have to make sure that you're not making any mistakes. And so in a position like this, you just simply rely on your intuition. You say, well, my pawns are going this way, my opponent's pawns are pointing this way, so that means I should be playing on the queen side. Since the center is closed, I need to follow my pawns. And so 2 moves quickly come to mind, either b4 or c5. And in the game I played c5, which isn't terrible, but however, b4 preparing it first would have been better. And so you really have to rely on your intuition in positions like this, because it's very unlikely that if you play some move, it's going to be like the losing move in a position like this. So it's not as important as, calculation just isn't as important, because, again, there's not going to be like an immediate tactical loss of a piece in a position like this. So it's more important to rely on your instincts. And intuition's kind of the topic of its own. But for this video on calculation, I think just leaving it at that is probably the best thing. And intuition probably deserves a video of its own. But okay, those are my 5 tips for improving your calculation. Okay, let me know how they work for you. Hopefully it makes your life a little bit easier. Bye.